So, as advertised, today we will look at state legislative history, and then we will finish up with the federal legislative history workshop that we started last time. You should all have a new packet. I know it looks very similar. This is Legislative History Part 2, State. Everybody have? And, oh, here you go. You will want. And if you don't have your workshop sheet from last time and you didn't leave it with me, I do have blank spares if you need. So just come see me before the workshop. Okay, I will be also passing out an assignment for legislative history at the end of class, and I do hope to have your statutes assignments back to you either next Tuesday or next Thursday, but definitely before assignment 3 will be due in 2 weeks. Okay, so essentially, state legislative history pretty much works the same as federal. The concepts are the same, the names have just been changed. I don't know about protecting the innocent, but the names are just basically different. So here's our sources handout, and just as we have session laws that are called public laws in the federal end, we have session laws that are called chapter laws in McKinney's, and it's the all-important chapter law in New York that will get us to the legislative history materials. I just closed that accidentally. Doesn't matter. By the way, we will be working off links today. The web links that we'll be working off today are all on the course website in the class web links left menu, and then legislative history folder. We are currently in the legislative history folder here. So to find these links in future and for your workshop and later assignment, this is one place you could go. Of course, Google also usually works. Okay, we will be focusing on New York, since that's where we are, and that's where most of you, if not all of you, will be practicing. But just to touch a little bit on other states' legislative history, the moral of this story is every state does it differently, just like they all have different, well, not all 50 different names, but they all choose their own names. They all have different documents available. They have documents organized differently, which, yes, makes it very difficult for all of us. So I have highlighted this website, which is a great portal, essentially, for different state legislative history research guides, as you can read on the screen. And this is where I would start. As I said, the states do it differently. You may wind up having to call a state library for help, especially if you're not in that state, because unless it's online, you will probably not find other states' legislative history documents in print very easily, if at all. These days, of course, more and more is going online, so that makes it a little bit easier. And that is also true for New York. A lot of our materials are now online, all over the place, as we shall see. But there are still times you have to go to the print. The other thing I'll mention about state legislative history, and this is true not just for other states, but for New York as well, and I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Many states, not all, have their own legal research guides. This is actually an older edition of New York that I keep near and dear in my office. Because, yes, even though I do this for a living, every now and again, and especially for complex areas like legislative history, it's a great reference. So just keep in mind these exist. If you find yourself doing a whole lot of research, which you may or may not be doing, it might be worth an investment. But as I said, they exist. This is a great one for New York. There's actually a couple of others. They exist for other states as well in print. And yes, there are always, of course, online research guides that you can find via Google. Okay, so let's dive into New York. And we'll start with the same approach we did with federal, in that we will look online at Westlaw. At the same time, we will look at the pages in print. That's what the handout is for, another walkthrough. Are these helpful? Seriously, because I hate killing all the trees. But I feel like if I put it on the screen, it's really hard to see because of the resolution, and you're in the back. So these are worth killing trees for? Seriously, because... Yeah. Okay. because I could scan these and put it on the screen, and then you would have to see it on the screen. Okay, so that being resolved, let's dive in to Westlaw that keeps on wanting to bounce me out. So let's see if it will let me in again. Oh, there we go, good. Okay, so again, just like federal, you'll probably be starting with a code section, and you'll wonder, what did the legislature mean by this particular language in the code? So the first thing you need to do, just as we did in federal, is you need to find the all-important. In New York, it's chapter law number. Remember, in federal, it's called a public law. Same concept, session law is the generic term. Again, other states have different names for it. I can tell you Connecticut is called a public act, and other than that, I can't tell you what other states are called. So you just have to be a little flexible with the naming there. But here in New York, we have chapter laws, abbreviated CH, C, CHAP. Again, you have to be kind of flexible with that, as well as you see references with the abbreviation. Again, same concept applies. To find that all-important chapter law, you want to head down to the end of the section, whether it's called Credits on Westlaw, History on Lexis, or just the parenthetical in print. And if we turn to our handout, we'll see the equivalent in print, Public Health. And we see the section on page 2. This is actually the same exact page that we saw from statutes, which is why you see some extra arrows in there that we used before. And turning to page 3, we see where we find our all-important chapter laws. So, of course, the chapter law that enacted Section 4410 is number on page 3.
Page 6.
Pardon me?
Page 6.
Page, okay, you should be in the Legislative History Part 2. And on page 3. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I have the wrong reference, not you. You are quite right. It's actually, apologies. It is page 6. This question still remains. The all-important chapter law number that enacted Section 4410 is?
938.
938 from what year?
1976.
Okay, everybody see that? Okay, I see most heads nodding. Anybody confused? Okay, and you'll notice I have underlined the last chapter law number. I've had a few questions, and in starting to go through your statutes assignments, I realized there are a few questions, so I'm going to try again, this time hopefully simplifying as much as I possibly can. The only time you really care about chapter law numbers are when you're doing legislative history research. It then becomes the all-important chapter law number, but that's really the only reason you're using the chapter laws, whether it's the first one that enacted it or the last one that amended it or any of them in between, if there are any. For updating your statute section, at least on Westlaw, you will go to the currentness link and you will just see when was Westlaw last updated. And so the answer to that is the current through. So Westlaw was last updated through Chapter 1 of 2016 as of today. That will change in a couple of weeks. In print, we don't have it in the walkthrough. Again, you check the pocket part, and you would find out, of course, that the print was last updated probably 2015. We don't really have a date because Westlaw, or rather West, stopped putting dates on it, most annoyingly, in my humble opinion. But we know probably the end of 2015, maybe early, sometime 2016. We can't really tell. Okay, so the parenthetical, the credits, the history, chapter law number, public law number, just for legislative history. Currentness, pocket part, updating. Someday you're going to go to a firm and you're going to do that. I wish I would be there. But anyway. Okay, does that make sense? Does that clarify? Because I know a couple people were confused. Okay. Then we shall move along. So the first thing you need to find is the chapter law number. So it may be that there are several. If there are several chapter law numbers, then how do you know which one enacted your language? Anybody remember? Works the same for state as it did for federal. It's right on page 6. Historical and statutory notes, that's what it's called in print in West codes. On Westlaw, anybody remember? I'll give you a hint here. Since we're talking about legislative history, we'll go to the History tab. Editor and Reviser's Notes. So, little bit to remember, but... And we'll review this on Lexis, and not really much on Bloomberg to review, but we'll review it as well. So, hysterical, I like that. Historical and statutory notes is where you can figure out what the different chapter laws, or if we're in the federal code, public laws, did, so you can figure out which, or if you have to, several, you need to check. More likely than not, it's going to be the one that enacted your section, the first one, because that included all the sections, but sometimes sections get added later on in time. So as we see, in 1996, Chapter 705 added Subdivision 4. So if it were Subdivision 4, get back to our document, so if it were Subdivision 4 of our code section, if this had the language we were interested in, we would want to go to Chapter 705. Otherwise, most likely, we would go to the original chapter, 938, as we just identified. Everybody on board with all that? Okay. So let's take a look at Chapter 705. So let's turn to page 7. So Chapter 705 refers us to McKinney's session laws. And again, just as a reminder, McKinney's session laws looks like this in print. If for whatever reason you're using the print, and we'll actually talk about why you might in just a little while. And again, remember, the red volumes actually says McKinney's, the black volumes do not. So if you're actually looking for the code, you want to go with the volume that doesn't say McKinney's. If you're looking for the session laws, you go with the volume that does. I'm going to hold on to these for just a little bit longer, and then I'll pass around if you're interested in holding the books themselves. So here in New York, one place to find legislative history documents. So again, the process, unfortunately, I don't have a great cartoon for New York, but the process works the same. The bill gets introduced, it gets referred to committees, the different bodies of the legislature actually, no, that won't help us. The different bodies of the legislature consider the bill. So if you're in New York, it's called the Assembly and Senate. Again, different states have different names for, some do just call them House and Senate or Assembly. They have all different names. I think there's 1 or 2 states that are what are called unicameral. I think Nebraska might be one. Anybody from Nebraska? So there are 1 or 2 states that only have one chamber in the legislature. Couldn't tell you which. So they only have to go through one house for the process, but the process is still the same. Bill to committee. Committee may or may not hold hearings. And then it gets referred to the full chamber, either Assembly or Senate in New York. They vote, gets dragged to the other house like our friend the bill in the federal. The other house or Senate does their thing. If they have to have a conference, they have a conference. And then if they both pass the same measure, they then submit that to the governor. If the governor signs it, we have a chapter law, and we have our hero, as we did with the federal. Now, the documents, as I said, are very different well, not very different. They're just different names, as we will see. So what New York does, which I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly unusual, is pulls together a pile of these documents called a bill jacket. So that is one of the two sources of New York legislative history that you will want to look for. And you'll want to look for both. You will frequently find a bill jacket. You won't always find the second source, which we'll talk about in a little while. And we'll come back to the McKinney session laws in print in a little while as well. Let's focus on where we would find bill jackets. And actually, we'll go back in our handout to page 2. So the first place to look for bill jackets, and I'll show you what's in a bill jacket in just a moment, is the New York State Archives. And honestly, the only way to know this is to A, either remember it, or B, remember it's called bill jackets and Google it, because you'll probably wind up at the New York State Archives website. Or 3, look in a research guide, and you would be reminded. So here is what the New York State Archives bill jacket collection, actually it's legislative bill and veto jackets, because sometimes if the governor vetoes a bill, he may still collect all of the documents along with his own veto statement as to why he's doing that. But if a governor vetoes a bill, you're probably not doing legislative intent research on it. You're doing some sort of other historical research, if at all. Okay, a couple of things to know about with the New York State Library. They they changed this over the past year, and in my humble opinion, thus far for the worse, because stuff that used to be available isn't as of yet. Now, maybe they'll get it all on there eventually, but they haven't yet. And by example, I mean, if you go to legislative and veto jackets for 2014, basically, you won't find anything. If you click on this, this is going to bring us back to the page we just were. In the old version, which you can't get to anymore, you used to be able to get there. However, a little bit older for 2011, and what you're looking for is more than just that parent collection link. You're looking for bills and vetoes, at which point you can then get into a bill jacket. And here the bill jackets are organized by all-important chapter law numbers. So chapter 1, 2, 3, as you can see, and of course we already had the year. So if we go back to 1996, remember our chapter law for 4410 was 1996, chapter 705. Actually, our original enacting was older than that, but I'm going with chapter 705 as if we were interested in subdivision 4. So again, 1996, we want to make sure we see the link for bills. Are you okay? You can see? Okay, and here's my other complaint with this website is you have to keep on going next and then next. In the old version, they had ranges of numbers, so I could find the range with 705. And honestly, this is going to take too long, so pretend I'm clicking on 705. I would have to click on next probably another half a dozen times. And I don't think any of you are that excited to watch me click. So we're pretending this is 705, and this essentially is what a bill jacket. You have a memorandum, which I realize you can barely see, but if we were to click on that, you could also zoom through the pages. Let's see if you can see any of these PDFs. You also have a download where you could probably see it a little bit better. So essentially what you get are a variety of different memoranda by supporters of the bill, by the governor, possibly. So I'm going to see if I can download this quickly. If not, we won't spend a lot of time. So where is this? All right. And you can't see it any better. Download it. There are times when the print just works better. So here we have a memo to the governor from possibly the sponsor of the bill, just explaining why the sponsor thinks it's a great idea. And that's essentially what you get in bill jackets, or memoranda from various parties possibly interested outside of the legislator parties, most likely legislators, saying why they think the bill is a great idea. So that's essentially bill jackets on the New York State Library website. And that's probably the first place I would go. The other thing you might have noticed is that it only goes back to 1995. So we will talk about what you need to do. Basically, if you need something older than 95 or more current, I think, than 2011 or 12 is as far as it goes, you'd have to go back in the site and check. And basically the answer to, well, there are two answers to that. One answer to that is on page 3, in which you will see the New York Legislature website. So I'm going to jump ahead here. And again, this link is on the class web links. And basically this allowed, right now, what you see is not much because actually the legislature is just reconvening today, or just has reconvened. No, it says 3 p.m. So as we speak, how about that? Assembly session has convened. How exciting. Anyway, to find a newer chapter law than either 2012 or 13, if it's not available on the New York Library site, you can search for it here. Again, you'd have your all-important chapter number. You would have your year. Actually, I'm going to go back to 2015. And you could search for a chapter number that way. And the one thing you would want to remember is to search for, I would search for everything except the text. And you can see example, I did that in chapter 42 of 2014 on page 3. I haven't tried this out yet, so let's see what happens. I'm not sure what we'll get. Oh, look. And you get essentially a bill tracking. Remember, we talked about bill tracking. So what happened to this particular chapter and how it wound up. So it got referred to insurance. It was substituted. There was some order for reading. And if we scroll down, since we checked off all this up here, whatever is available on this site, which is basically the sponsor's memo. So introducer's memorandum in support. So this is probably less than you would find in a bill jacket if you did a compare and contrast with this site versus the New York Library digital collection site for the years that they cover. But this would be a place to go if you couldn't find it if you couldn't find the chapter on the New York Digital Library site. Let's take a quick look, as promised, on Legis, just to review. And then I'll show you So I'm going to our section 4410, same section we were looking at, if it will cooperate. Come on, Lexis, you can do it. Or not. All right, let's try it this way. And I'm typing in CLS because I know that CLS is the version of the New York statutes on Lexis, and that will get us there more directly. I was afraid that was going to happen. Oh, I'm just not patient enough. So at 4410. So basically on Lexis, and honestly, there's just not a lot on Lexis. Sorry, you Lexis prefers, but Lexis is not the place I would go if I have a choice. I would actually go to the web first. But to show you what is on Lexis, briefly, basically you click on the chapter law you were interested in, again, after identifying the all-important chapter law number and checking the historical and statutory notes. And then what you would have is bill tracking. You would actually not get links. You may or may not get links to documents, and I think more often than not you would not get the links. Honestly, I would say the moral of this story, especially on Lexis, if you only have Lexis available and you're not finding what you want on the free web, call Lexis. Lexis Advanced has been changing, as you've noticed, over time. And again, this is one area I think they are still woefully behind Westlaw. And now that I've said that, somebody in Lexis will be offended if they ever find out. And hopefully we'll try to catch up. And as you've seen, actually, over the course of the semester, they've done a halfway decent job of starting to catch up in other areas, like that new browse menu. So they might with this. So I would say if you do find yourself having to do legislative history on Lexis, call them instead of fighting with it in frustration. And I would say the same is true of Bloomberg, and not just because you keep on getting that annoying reload message. We're still working on it, I'm afraid. Well, I'm not afraid we're working on it. Unfortunately, we just haven't fixed it yet. But what is available, at least now, again, not surprisingly, under legislative and regulatory, we would go to state legislative materials. And basically, the answer is not much on Bloomberg. And again, they are playing catch up, so maybe that will improve over time. But especially as we're having trouble getting there, I don't think it's worth the time to prove to you that there's not much there. But let's go back to Westlaw, because there is much there. Westlaw would be my next choice after the free web, and I would say after the free web because A, the web's free, and what's available on the web is pretty much what's available on Westlaw, because Westlaw has a lot of the bill jackets. Westlaw may actually be a little more up to date, since as we noticed, we couldn't get bill jackets from 2014 or 15, and Westlaw may have them, so it may be a little better in that regard. To get to them, what you always want to remember on Westlaw is for legislative history, you go to history, legislative history materials. Or you want to, of course, check the editor and reviser's notes. But once you've checked the editor and reviser's notes and know which chapter you're after, then when you go to legislative history for state, you'll get, at least for New York State, of course, you'll get whatever bill jackets Westlaw has available. So actually, as you can see, there are several different bill jackets, and notice they're different chapter numbers, so that's why you need that all-important chapter law number. And clicking here on Westlaw, you get to see, so actually, in truth, Westlaw is a little bit better because you can see it better. They've transcribed it, so you're not dealing with a poorly scanned PDF. So we see here illegible text characters, source data, or indicate, so it is scanned somewhat. So here we have a memoranda in the Senate. And basically they're just different documents as you scroll through. So you're something from a memorandum. And just a whole bunch of different documents. As you can see, this is a pretty long PDF because I've got a long way to scroll down. I won't go through it all. I'm just going to give you a sense now that we can actually read it. Governor's Program Bill. And you need to honestly read through to see if any of this applies to what you're interested in. I guess also an advantage, no guessing about it, an advantage to Westlaw is going to be the searchability. I can at least do a Control F and search through all this long scrolling of documents to look for HMO or whatever my terminology that I'm interested in. So maybe I'll revise that, and if Westlaw is available to me and I need to make sure it's in my contract, remember that concept from way back in the beginning of the semester, a lot of times bill jackets are not in the contract. Even though the statutes are, the code is, you would think, oh, well, the bill jackets are part of the code, right? Well, no, unfortunately. So you want to make sure it's in your contract. And if both of those apply, then it looks like Westlaw certainly can be both easy to read as well as giving you the searchability that I mentioned. So that's bill jackets on Westlaw. Okay, the other place to look for legislative history for some code sections would be the New York legislative reports. And you can think of those as the equivalent of committee reports, except they don't always happen. In fact, they don't happen very frequently at all. Legislative reports get issued typically when there's a major revision of some part of the code, like if there's a major revision of the CPLR. We've all had to deal with the CPLR, I'm guessing, at some point. So the there may be minor amendments to individual sections of the CPLR, but over the span of, since New York became a state, there have been a number of major revisions of the CPLR. Another example might be the criminal code. There may be a major revision of that, and there are other sort of major chunks of the code that get revised as a whole, and in that case you would want to look for a legislative report. Now you might not know whether or not it is a major chunk with a legislative report. You'd want to either look in, again, the print, the editor and reviser's notes would give you a clue into that. And that probably would be the best place to get a clue in. If it says see legislative report, then you definitely want to check that out. To find these legislative reports, you would go to the other site I have tabbed here. And again, you could just Google New York legislative reports, and there's a whole site. This site isn't very complete or thorough at all as I went through, and it doesn't look like they go back very far. So this would be, you hope you get lucky and find it here, but probably it's unlikely, and then you would have to track down the legislative report another way, probably in your favorite law library. This would be an example where you would, as an alum, want to call us or call the New York State Library. These, frankly, just aren't easy to find. Sometimes they exist in the McKinney's session laws. So you want to identify the year of your chapter law or the year that the report was issued, and they may be different. Again, there's no way to make this easy, unfortunately. What I want you to walk away from today knowing is that these things exist, and if you see a reference to them and you have to do legislative intent research, you have to find it. Remember that Chase Scientific case I showed you as to why you might be interested in legislative intent? Because my fictional enterprising junior associate did his or her legislative history research, and actually this was in the CPLR, where this fictional enterprising junior associate found a legislative report and found what the legislature had intended with regard to changing the statute of limitations, and it was directly on point to the facts at issue in Chase Scientific, which had to do with the statute of limitations for insurance brokers. And that was in this legislative report that my fictional junior associate found. The point being, again, those legislative reports can be critical. So if you see reference and you are doing legislative intent, check it. Don't worry about finding it. That's something. Hopefully they'll go online by the time 3 years hence you have to do this. Hopefully it'll be easier to find. If not, always give us a call. Actually, those are I love those phone calls. They're very interesting. Okay, so those are New York legislative reports. So the other place to find bill jacket information and, as I mentioned, legislative reports, if they are not online, one other place would be McKinney's session laws. So in our walkthrough handout, we have actually looked at all of these pages through page 7, just not quite in order. So we've seen this before. This is our chapter law. So we've been looking at chapter law 705, which we learned from our credits, was enacted in 1996. So I would go to the 1996 volume of the session laws. And I might want to look, remember, in the text of the session laws, because sometimes there are purpose or intent sections within the statute itself. We saw that in the federal code with ERISA. There was a long purpose and intent section. Sometimes that exists in state as well. You might actually even see that in the code. If you look in your table of contents, back in your article, you might actually see an intent section, or you might see it in the chapter law as well. It may not be there, so don't expect it to be there, but you do want to check to see if it is. So here we see the session law on pages 8 and 9. And so we see how subdivision 4 was added, and here's the language of subdivision 4 on page 9 as it was added by our chapter 705. And that is in volume 1 of 1996. So you'll find the chapter laws themselves in the first volume for the year. The reason I make a big deal of that is that in the second volume for that year, you will find memoranda, tables, and an index. What you're interested in is the memoranda. Now, for total amazing bragging rights, anybody remember another publication where they did this, where you had the session laws in the first volume and the legislative history in the second volume? Total amazing bragging rights for Brandon, absolutely, USCAN. Remember, USCAN had the public laws in the early few volumes, and then the legislative history materials in the latter volumes, and the method works the same way. You find the all-important chapter law or public law number on USCAN in the early volumes, and then you use that all-important chapter number here in McKinney's in volume 2 to find whatever memoranda are in McKinney's volume 2. So we have our all-important chapter number 705. I'll pass these around if anybody's interested. I feel like the physical volumes, just see them exist, puts it in context. Anyway, to see what it looks like in print on page 10, you see volume 2. And then on page 11, looking up, because we know our all-important chapter law number is 705, so we just turn the pages looking on the top for 705. They're in numerical order. And this is where whatever McKinney's has in terms of memorandum, we will find it. And so on the handouts, page 11, we see a memorandum in support by the New York State Senate. We see that it relates to Chapter 705, as my handy-dandy arrow indicates, and then we see purpose, to make available healthcare consumers more detailed, and then summary of provisions, lots about HMOs. Again, we have to read this to see if it even talks about the language we're interested in. Continued on page 12, there's a statement in support. So this may or may not be useful for whatever your legislative intent question is. But this, in essence, is what is available in McKinney's for Chapter 705. And again, you would really only need to come to McKinney's if you couldn't find a bill jacket elsewhere. in print. Well, you come to McKinney's in print if you couldn't find the bill jacket elsewhere online, excuse me. The other place to find legislative intent documents, again in print, if you can't find the bill jacket elsewhere online, would be another publication called the New York Legislative Annual. Looks like this. Works the same way. All-important chapter law number. You need the year and the all-important chapter law number, and then you look up that chapter number in that year's volume. So again, you look up 705 in the New York Legislative Annual. We'll actually be doing our workshop in these volumes in a little while. But taking a look at what it looks like on page 14, it's the title page, and really what it looks like on page 15, again, turning to 705. And if you did a quick compare and contrast between the Legislative Annual and McKinney's, you would see that they don't replicate the same document. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you look at McKinney's and then you look in the Legislative Annual and you get the same document. Not always. And also, what's in McKinney's and Legislative Annual, there may be other additional documents in the bill jacket, which is why you really want to see if you can find the bill jacket. But this at least gets you started. And actually, the Legislative Annual has a couple of documents, as we see, going from pages 16 to 17, if you had flipped through the volume that's now going around. Excuse me. Okay, any questions? Haven't stopped for questions in a while. Hopefully this is somewhat of a review of just legislative history generally. Last, maybe not least, but pretty close to least, and quite a number of attorneys do this. If you find yourself really in need of finding a bill jacket, and you're not finding it on the New York State Library site, not finding it on Westlaw, don't have access to Westlaw, there are services out there, and there tend to be services in most states that will get you those legislative history documents. And frankly, it's a money-making opportunity, right? Doesn't sound pretty easy, I'm guessing, if you haven't seen this before and worked with it for many years. So it might be nice just to say, someone, could you please get these for me? I'll pay you. And that's what the New York Legislative Service does. And you can see they have a nice website with a pretty picture. And as I said, most states have something similar. So just know that these exist. If you find yourself in need, for whatever reason, either New York or other states, you can also try finding online the state's library. We have the New York State Library, and that's actually who puts on the bill jackets that's the website that we've been looking at for the bill jackets. Other states have state libraries as well, and sometimes calling them can be useful as well. So that's when all else fails, or if you don't have time, if you're working on $1 billion deal and have the extra money, I don't think it's that expensive, honestly, but do have a budget to spend, and that is a service that's available. Okay. Any questions? So we're going to go down to the library to do a workshop for New York legislative history materials, pretty much looking at everything we've just run through. So remember, you do want to bring your laptops because it's somewhat online, and we'll also look at the McKinney's session laws and legislative annual in print. And somewhere here, there's mine. There are basically 7 different examples I've given you. So I'm going to divide you up into 7 groups. Within your group, you can work all 3 together, 2 together. There's actually only 20 people here today, so there will be one group of 2. Here, I'll pass these around. What I will ask is that if you're working as a group, you only need to hand me back 1 sheet with your 3 names. If you're working individually, then please hand me your sheet with your name on it. How about I will let you team or triple up as need be. Groups of no more than 3. And we'll see how that works. I may have to rearrange it because, as I said, I only have 7 examples, so there can only be 7 groups. So why don't we head downstairs with your laptops. I've reserved the tables downstairs, and as we're heading downstairs, you can figure out your groups. And just come and let me know so I make sure that we have the requisite number of groups. Okay. And since you'll probably be going ahead of me, the materials are at the tables nearest the reference desk. You'll see the signs on the tables. See if I need anything else here. No. We'll pause our recording. I'll seem to get through it. Yeah, that works. One thing I had neglected to review, the question came up in terms of finding documents on Westlaw. I mean, yes, there are many ways. Matt found a great way. You all seem to find a great way. But just as a reminder, especially for other state statutes, you go to state materials, find your state. So we'll get to New York. And statutes. Since that's what we're looking for, there's this template. I particularly like this because I hate trying to do 2 or 3 searches just to guess, so I know I can just go here. It's a few clicks, but I can go here and find, and then you just have to find your code. Now, this is, of course, when you already have a section like we did for our workshop. So use it, don't use it. Again, just a tip, hint, to make things a little easy if it makes sense to you. Okay, so we're going to spend the remainder of the evening basically reviewing legislative history overall, but mostly federal. You all seem to do pretty well in the state. So I'm going to do a quick review of strategy and the sources, and then we'll go back and finish up the workshop, and then I'll distribute the assignment for legislative history, roughly in that order. Anyway, taking a look at our key to legislative history research, which I distributed last time, and this really is true for state as well as federal. Again, just changing the name from public law to New York chapter law or whatever state you're in that calls session law. Perhaps, or I even say here, or state session law number. So we've talked a lot about the legislative process. We have our cartoon of the bill, which there actually is a link to on the class web link, so if you want to watch it again. Understanding the documents and their abbreviations, and again, that's in the legislative history, this handout, which, by the way, is in the handouts section of the course website, should you need another copy. Knowing how to find the all-important public law or state session law number. So today we reviewed finding the all-important chapter law number in New York. Same process applies for federal law. And what we'll focus on today, knowing those 1 or 2 good sources, both free, no money, and for $. And actually today's more of really a review, sort of combined with a strategy on how you might want to approach a legislative intent question. So at least from a state, and then we'll finish up with state and focus on federal. At least from a state, as I mentioned, you really want to find bill jackets, and if it exists, the legislative report. And the bill jacket, if you can find the full bill jacket, if not for whatever reason, too old, too new, then going to legislative annual like we did, going to the McKinney session law in print like we did. There's also that New York legislative statute search site that I showed you. There's a link on the website as well. For federal, since there are far more documents and they go into far more detail, It kind of depends on what it is you need to do. So your first step, as it is with any research project, is to figure out what you need and how much time you have to spend. It may be like my fictional young associate, really just need to dig in and find whatever it is you can on a particular legislative intent question, and then you're going to want to look at whatever you can find. It may be you just want to get a sense of if there's anything out there, get a sense if it was discussed. Just do a quick search, and again, it depends on your client's issue. And also it depends on how much time you have or have been asked to spend. There are the boil the ocean questions, and there are the quick and dirty questions, and then there are a lot in between. So if it's just a quick sense of what the intent might be, then of course, anybody remember the best source for federal legislative intent? Best document, rather? Source is actually right too. Which, yeah, sure. Committee reports, great. So you might want to look at the committee report. If there is one, remember the conference report. Well, who can give a quick refresher on what a conference report is?
Conference report is when one legislature disagrees with another legislature what the terms or the words in the statute should be, and a report is written on the disagreement.
Remember in our video, the bill starts in one chamber, goes through the whole debates and gets passed, and then gets dragged. I love that scene. Gets dragged to the other chamber and has to go through the whole thing again. And then the other chamber considers it. And people being people, they may or may not agree exactly on the identical language. And if the House and the Senate do not agree on the identical language, they have two separate versions. So they have to figure out a single version, have to agree upon a single version to send to the president. So they meet in a conference. And the leaders of the House and leaders of the Senate appoint members of their chambers to meet in the conference committee. The conference committee hopefully hashes out a single version that they can agree upon, and they produce, as Rob says, a conference report. So if there is a conference report, you want to check it, because they may or may not discuss your language. They may not, in which case it's obviously not useful. But if they do, then you definitely want to check. One other thing about the committee report is, depending on the piece of legislation, it may be a very complex one, like ERISA was. ERISA actually took a few years before it actually got passed. So there were probably a number of different committees that reported on ERISA. You want to just be aware when you're looking at those different reports what language they're talking about, because if the legislative language got changed and amended over the course of considering it, if it was very complex, then the committee report language may or may not apply. And I think that actually happened with ERISA when we looked at the conference report language, the section-by-section analysis. Go back, review that in a sec. That was slightly different than the earlier House report language we looked at for the same preemption section. And as I just said, in the committee reports, in the conference reports, one place you want to make sure to check is that section-by-section analysis, if it exists. And I'm going to come here to the computer, and hopefully I didn't get logged out. If I do, we'll log back in. To look at a committee report, it's in here somewhere. Okay, so here's it's actually the same page we looked at in the print handout. You want to find the section-by-section analysis, and again, you see this general purposes, and then as the name suggests, it goes section by section and tells you what they had in mind. I probably got logged out of Hein Online. Let's see if it comes back. But there are other parts of the committee report too. There's a general purpose. We actually saw purpose just before the section-by-section analysis. If you're lucky in a report, you'll get a table of contents. Once again, a wonderful table of contents. It's always useful. So it will guide you if you're lucky, if your particular report has one, and I think we'll probably wind up getting logged out again here on Hein Online, but it'll give you a sense of what sections might be worth checking. So here's general explanation. I realize you may not be able to read that way back there, but hopefully you'll take my word for it. So you might want to take a look at the general explanation and look at the table of contents to see if it can get you to the section by section analysis, because otherwise you kind of have to just flip or scroll through to find it if you don't have a table of contents. Let's see if we got anywhere. Oh, it's not going to get us there. Oh well. That's all right. I'm not going to fuss with this too much, does it? And I suspect it logged me out. That's okay. So committee reports. That's the quick and dirty approach for legislative history. So in our key to finding legislative history, we want to know a couple of good sources, both free and fee. So one source as we're looking at is Hein Online. Now, Hein Online, you can find the committee reports that way. Hein Online is actually the best place to go when you need the full what I call boil the ocean type of research. Another source we looked at is congress.gov, as well as Legis and Westlaw. Actually, again, I think Westlaw is going to be much easier than Legis in this for legislative history, as we've already seen. I mean, I'll go back here since I've started. Basically, just what we reviewed for state works the same for federal. We go to the credits to get our all-important public law number. We go to the editor and reviser's note to figure out what the different public laws did, figure out which ones we have to look at, and then we go to legislative history materials to find our public law, and depending on what our public law number is, seeing what Westlaw has available. And again, on the quick and dirty front, congress.gov. Again, we would already need our all-important public law number. Bless you. Go to that Congress number, so whatever our public law number is. So we were interested in 109-280, which was the last public law to amend our section, our preemption section. And then just scroll down, or however you want to find your number. Now, as you may or may not recall from when we looked at this, there really wasn't much here in congress.gov for 109-280, but you might find a link, a couple of links at most you'll find, typically to committee reports, maybe to a conference report. As you can see for 109-280, there's not much of anything on congress.gov, so like most things in life, you get what you pay for. So in this instance, congress.gov, it's free, but it doesn't give you anything. And of course, the other place to go, I guess, Westlaw would be one place, and the other place to go, either if you have access or you can always come back here to Hofstra, is ProQuest. And to get to ProQuest, at least while you're here now, start here at the library homepage, scroll down here to the Find Research Guides, and you can search for ProQuest. You do have to remember the name, that's true. And then you want to do the click here, and it may or may not ask, oh, nope, I'm logged in, so it remembered me. And then once again, look for legislative histories and plug in your all-important public law number. And then make sure it will pull up a couple, but make sure you're looking at your all-important public law number, so that's how you make your choice if you get more than one result. And what ProQuest will do is list for you basically all of the documents. So you can take a look. So while we didn't find any reports on congress.gov, turns out there are quite a number of reports, as we can see here on ProQuest. So you can use any of these resources for either type of research, either the quick and dirty or the boil the ocean. Obviously, it depends on what you have access to. And also, as we were already looking at, Hein Online is fine if you have access to go just to pull up a particular committee report. If you have one in mind, I'm not sure it would be the greatest if you're just sort of searching around. Hein Online is really the best from a strategy standpoint for the boil the ocean. So from a boil the ocean standpoint, I would start with Hein Online and see if your public law is available. And I'll sort of review the different strategies at the end here. So here on Hein Online, again, remember it's under U.S. Federal Legislative History Research, not under L or F, but U. And you'd be surprised how many times I'm looking and then remembering, oh yeah, I have to go to U. So you click on U.S. and then you can use popular name if you have it, or again, find it. Having that all-important public law number makes it just a little bit easier. So let's go to our original law, the original public law that enacted ERISA, if that's the language we need. So I go to 93-406 if you don't remember. So we go to 93rd Congress, and again, I'm just going to do a shortcut to get down to 406. And there are a couple of different versions. I'll go for the full one. If I'm really doing a boil the ocean, I'm going to want to look at all 22 volumes. And again, the reason I prefer Hein Online for a boil the ocean is I can search all 22. I can do a keyword search for all of 22 of those volumes. So whether it's preemption, I might try to search my section number. And remember, I probably search my public law section number because that's what the legislative history is referring to, is the public law section. So I might search section 514 if you remember that's the section. If I'm doing a boil the ocean, I'll do both, honestly. I've had to do that. And what I'll do here on Hein Online is remember the show more because it only had House reports. I might want to look at Senate reports as well, at least starting with the reports. I might want to look at the other, if I'm have to do a boil the ocean kind of project, I might want to look at all of them. But I'm going to start in the reports again because they're the best source. And I can actually get Hein to show me both. And then just take a look at where in the document my terms appear. So Hein Online, if I have to do a very thorough, again, I call it boil the ocean. Hein Online is the first place if my public law is available. Not all public laws are available on Hein Online. If either my public law isn't available on Hein Online or I don't have access, I might see if I have access to ProQuest. The disadvantage of ProQuest is it's not full text searchable. So I would have to pull up each document individually and then try to do a keyword search through the PDF. After that, my next step would be Westlaw. Westlaw doesn't even have necessarily all the documents necessarily for a public law, but Westlaw has more than Legis, and it's much easier to find, and certainly more than Congress.gov. My order for a quick and dirty search is really what's available to me in terms of just taking a quick look at report. If I'm not particular about which report I'm looking at, I might start in Congress.gov, but as we've seen, I might not find any reports there. So then I might actually go to FedSys. We haven't really reviewed that much for legislative history, but they do have committee reports there. If I have a particular committee report I have in mind, I could just Google it. The problem with Google is that if you don't have a particular document in mind, you can't just Google legislative history of ERISA and expect to find anything particularly useful. Unfortunately, maybe Google will evolve over time for that. Okay, and again, by way of review, and I'll just do this one more time because I think it is worth reviewing. Kind of walked through it, but the two steps of the all-important public law, again, finding either going to credits, or it's called history on Lexis, or just the parenthetical if you're in the print, and you see this whole long list here. So then you know you have to go and you have to know what section you're interested in within your, or subdivision you're interested in within your code section. If you're interested in the whole thing, then you probably just want to go to the original enacted. So your first public law, which for our section, of course, is that 93-406. If there's a particular provision, like we did just now, the subdivision, then again, you want to go to history, and first you go to editor and reviser's notes. It's called history on Lexis, and you scroll down to the amendments section, and you see what the different amendments did. If you don't see it here, then likely is you have to go to the original public law that enacted your section. If you do see, for instance, if it is, turns out you were interested in subsection E and that's it, then you could go just to 109-280. Maybe you have to go to both because maybe it only amended your subsection and the rest of the language stayed the same. And then once you've determined the different public law numbers, hopefully only one, but maybe more, then you go to legislative history materials, either here on Westlaw or elsewhere. And yeah, this is complicated in a lot of steps and a lot of ifs, maybes, and no real certainty of one place or even just a couple of places. So again, I can't tell you how many questions we answer at the reference librarians answer at the reference desk of attorneys and very experienced attorneys who don't even have the first clue of where to start. They don't even know what an all-important public law number is. Forget about how to find it. So by all means, find yourself a good library or a good research guide, both online or in print. Okay, any questions? Then let's go back and get some practice with our federal workshop. Did anybody not have the paper that they started last time? Because I have some extra blanks. I think everybody picked up what I had collected. Yes? No? Everybody good? They'll all start at various different points. Anybody need an extra? Consult with one another, just hand me back your sheet so I can see where the areas of